My daughter put my suitcase beside the front door on Christmas Eve and told me the room would be a home office by New Year's. 3 hours later, I was kneeling on the shoulder of a dark stretch of highway south of Clarksville, changing a flat tire for a woman I'd never met while her 11-year-old daughter stood in the cold asking me questions I hadn't been asked in years. By the time the sun came up, I was sitting in a farmhouse kitchen that had no reason to know my name, drinking the best coffee I'd had in a long while, and the offer that came before that morning was fully lit. I still feel it settle into my chest when I think about it, like a hand pressed there to steady me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what happens when a story ends better than it has any right to. My name is Chester. I'm 64 years old. I spent 38 years in public education, 28 as a principal, the last 10 as assistant superintendent for a mid-sized district in Middle Tennessee. I retired earlier than I'd planned when the district consolidated and my position was eliminated. The word they used was restructured. I was given a modest pension, a plaque that still sits in a box somewhere, and a handshake from a man who had been in the district for 11 months and couldn't say my name without checking his notes first. That was 2 years before this story begins. After Ruth passed, she'd been sick a long while, and when she finally let go, it was almost a mercy, though that word never fully fits. I sold our house in Murfreesboro and moved into an apartment. Then the rent went up more than my pension could absorb, and the building went up for sale, and my daughter Amanda called and said the practical thing. She said, "Dad, you should come stay with us for a while. Dylan and I have the room. We'll figure it out as a family." I moved into their guest room in April. I made myself useful the way you do when you know you're existing on someone else's goodwill. I fixed the dripping faucet in the upstairs bathroom, replaced the weather stripping on the garage door, drove Amanda's kids to soccer practice when Dylan's schedule was erratic and Amanda's was worse. I bought my own groceries when I could, kept my things compressed to one corner of the room, tried hard not to take up more space than had been given to me. For a while it seemed like it might work. Then Dylan lost his marketing job in September. They let 3 people go on a Friday afternoon and he was one of them. He pivoted quickly. That's the word he used, pivoted, to freelancing. He set up at the dining room table with 2 monitors and a ring light and worked 12-hour days trying to build a client list. I stayed out of the dining room. I took long walks. I applied for jobs, though at 64 with a pension and a resume that topped out in school administration, the market for me was roughly what you'd expect. December arrived. One morning the neighborhood had regular leaves, and the next morning there was tinsel on every mailbox. I had bought a Christmas ham and small presents for Amanda's kids. Nothing large, but specific things they'd mentioned wanting. I had them wrapped and stacked on the shelf in my room. On the evening of December 24th, Amanda knocked on my door. I knew before she opened her mouth. I don't know how exactly, but I knew. She said Dylan needed the room for a home office. He'd signed 2 new clients and couldn't keep working at the dining room table because it disrupted the household. She said they'd considered their options, and this was the most practical solution. She said she was sorry about the timing, but they'd need the room by the 1st of the year, and it would probably be easiest if I found something before the holidays ended. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. I looked at the wrapped presents on the shelf. I asked if the kids were awake. She said they'd gone to bed early because of Christmas morning. I asked if I could leave their presents under the tree, and she said yes, of course, absolutely. The way she said it was practiced. She'd thought through that part. Dylan appeared in the doorway while I was folding shirts. He said he hoped I understood, that it wasn't personal, that they'd tried to make it work. He used the word logistics. I had used that word in school board meetings 100 times, when the numbers didn't line up, when a program had to be cut, when a person's value was being translated into a budget line. I know exactly what it means when someone says logistics. I told him I understood. Amanda stood in the hallway while I carried my bags out. She didn't offer to help. When I came back for the last box, I could see her through the living room doorway, standing at the window with her arms folded, looking out at the street. She wasn't conflicted. She looked like someone who had finished something difficult and was relieved to have it behind her. I left the presents under the tree in the dark. I didn't write cards. There was nothing left in me to put in one. The temperature outside was 22 degrees. I sat in my 2009 Silverado with the engine running and the heat on my face. The neighborhood was quiet except for the Christmas lights strung along porch rails and gutters. Those soft white and gold strings that are supposed to feel warm, that are supposed to mean something. Ruth and I had hung lights like that for 26 years. The last time I put them up was the Christmas before she got too sick to come outside and see them. I drove with no destination. That's not a figure of speech. I had nowhere to go. There was a Waffle House on the south side of town, open because Waffle House is always open, and I sat at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs and ate alone while the overnight crew moved around quietly. A man 2 stools down in a postal uniform looked as wrung out as I felt. A young couple in a corner booth appeared to be from somewhere else, which was the only explanation for being in Clarksville at 9 on Christmas Eve. Nobody bothered anybody. The waitress kept my cup full without being asked. I sat there for close to an hour. My phone didn't make a sound. I thought about the day I walked into Roosevelt Elementary in Smyrna as its new principal, September of 1989. The way the hallway had felt under my feet. The weight of knowing that building was mine to be responsible for, not mine to own, mine to answer for. There's a difference that matters, and I'd spent my whole career teaching it to people who needed to understand it. I paid and went back to the truck. I pulled north onto Route 41 West, because it was the direction I was already pointed and I had no better reason to go anywhere else. It was close to 11 when I saw them. The hazard lights blinked orange from about a quarter-mile out. A dark sedan sat half on the gravel shoulder, and a woman in a heavy coat stood beside it with one arm raised toward the road as cars swept past. There weren't many cars. It was Christmas Eve on a secondary highway. I slowed. Through the rear window of the sedan, I could see the silhouette of a child's head pressed against the glass. I have thought since then about why I stopped, and the honest answer is that I almost didn't. I was 64 years old, everything I owned in the truck bed, not sure where I'd sleep that night, and colder than I'd admitted to myself. I had problems bigger than I knew what to do with. But I saw that child's face against the glass, and I thought about what kind of person drives past. I've been on both sides of that road. I know which side stays with you longer. I pulled over and got out. The woman was in her late 40s, dark hair, eyes that showed relief and wariness in the exact ratio of someone smart enough not to fully trust a stranger, but desperate enough to hope. She said her name was Maureen. Her daughter was Abby. The front right tire had blown on a seam in the pavement. She had a spare in the trunk but had never changed a tire and wasn't certain she had the right tools. She had the right tools. What she didn't have was experience with a corroded lug nut on a 12-year-old Honda in 22-degree air, or the patience of someone who'd fixed 30 years of school building problems by learning not to panic when something didn't move the way it was supposed to. I said, "Let me take a look." Abby climbed out about 5 minutes in. She stood near the bumper in her winter coat and watched with the focused attention of a kid who actually wants to understand what she's seeing, not just watch it happen. She asked good questions, not interruptions, real questions. What does that tool do? Why does the jack go there? How do you know when it's tight enough? I answered everyone. I explained as I worked the way I used to walk teachers through something new, not just showing the steps but explaining the reasoning behind each one. "You know a lot of stuff," she said. "I used to know more," I said, "but the practical things tend to stay." "Are you a teacher?" "I was, for a long time." She thought about that. The cold didn't seem to reach her the way it was reaching my hands, which ached around the lug wrench in a way I'd learned to pretend I didn't notice. "Do you have grandkids?" she asked. Maureen said quietly, "Abby." "It's all right," I said. My throat had gone tight in a way that wasn't about the cold. "No, not yet." Abby nodded like I'd said something worth keeping in mind. The whole job took 35 minutes. The spare went on solid and I checked the pressure as well as I could by hand. Just a donut spare, only rated for 50 miles, and I told Maureen to keep it under 50. She offered me money twice. I said no both times. She looked at me the way people do when they're searching for the catch. I understand it. When something costs you nothing, you look for the invoice that must be coming. There was no invoice. I just didn't want to be the person who keeps driving. Maureen asked where I was headed. I thought about the Holiday Inn on Route 9 that I'd passed 2 hours ago, for reasons I still wasn't quite ready to name. I said I wasn't sure yet. She said, "Follow us then. That's a donut tire, and I'd feel better seeing your headlights behind me for the first few miles." I followed her for 12 miles off the main road and then onto a county road that curved through dark fields and bare trees. The spare held. When she turned in through a gate at the end of a long driveway, Abby had her window down despite the temperature and was waving me in like she was directing traffic. I pulled through. What appeared at the end of the drive was not what I'd pictured. Maureen had said a place outside town, and I'd imagined a ranch house with a covered porch. What I saw instead was a 3-story farmhouse with deep wraparound porches, every window lit, a property that stretched back into the darkness in a way that suggested serious acreage. I sat in the truck after I parked and didn't get out. Maureen came around the front of the truck. "My husband designed it," she said, reading my expression. "He grew up in a house with 5 people and 900 square feet. He said when he had money he was going to build something that always had room for one more." She paused for a moment. "He died 2 years ago. Car accident on 65 North. I keep it because Abby loves it and because I believe he'd want it lived in." An older woman came out of the front door with a coat thrown over her pajamas. Agnes, who had been with the family for 7 years, and who expressed her relief at their safe return by saying very little and holding Abby for a long time. Inside it was warm the way large houses with real fireplaces are warm. Not forced air, but something that seems to come from the walls themselves. Agnes made coffee. Abby, who was nominally being sent to bed, kept materializing in doorways to add fragments of thought to whatever was being said. Maureen said, "Stay the night, please. It's past midnight and 22 degrees and you just spent 40 minutes on the ground for us." Every reflex I had said no. The same reflex that had kept me quiet for 7 months in Amanda's house. The one that said, "Don't be a burden, don't take up more than you've been given." I'd been running that reflex so long it had started to feel like character. Abby appeared at the kitchen doorway. "We have a carriage house," she announced. "Mama was going to rent it, but she never got around to it. It has a coffee maker and it's heated. I use it for art projects, but there's still a real bed." "Abby," Maureen said, in a tone that was not quite a correction. "The blankets out there are the thick kind," Abby continued, unfazed. Something in my chest released, just slightly, like a knot that had been held too long, finally admitting it was tired. "One night," I said. After Abby went to sleep and Agnes turned in, Maureen and I sat by the fire with the end of the coffee. She asked, in the careful way of someone who suspects the answer, whether I had family expecting me somewhere. I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the presence under the tree in the dark, not the porch light that had been off when I drove away, but enough. She didn't offer pity. That was the first thing that surprised me. She sat with what I'd said for a moment, and then she said, "I've been trying to solve a problem for 8 months." She told me about Bright Path Learning Centers, 3 locations in the Nashville area, built from 2 tutoring sessions a week into something that employed 26 people and served more than 300 students. After her husband died, she'd kept it running on momentum and determination. But 6 months into her grief, her director of curriculum had resigned to move to Oregon, and Maureen had been trying to fill that position since spring. 6 interviews, she said. People with the right degrees and the right vocabulary. None of them understand what learning actually looks like from inside a school. They talk about metrics. They don't talk about children. I listen without interrupting, which is a skill most people think they have and very few actually do. "You spent 28 years as a building principal," she said. "How do you know that?" "You told Abby you used to know more things than you know now. That's a specific kind of answer. And you explained a tire change to an 11-year-old in a way that made her want to understand it rather than just watch it. That's not a skill you pick up. That's something you've done for a long time." She looked at me steadily. "What would you say your strongest professional contribution was?" I didn't have to think about it. "Developing teachers," I said. "Finding the people with the instinct and helping them build the skill to match it. The ones who came in wanting to be good but not yet knowing how, those were the ones I was best with." She nodded once, slowly. The offer she made was specific. Director of Educational Programs, $58,000 per year with health coverage, a role working directly with her staff and families. The carriage house she offered at a nominal rent. Her choice, she said, because a man who needs to feel he's contributing his own way shouldn't be handed something outright. "This is still charity," I said. "No," she said. "Charity is giving someone something they haven't earned. What I'm offering is a position I've been trying to fill for 8 months, to a person who has exactly the background I need. The transaction is clear. You give me 30 years of educational leadership experience. I give you a salary and a place to live while you decide if this is where you want to be." I looked at the fire. "You don't know me," I said. "I know what I saw tonight," she said. "That's usually where I start." I moved into the carriage house on December 26th. I started work on January 3rd. The teachers were cautious with me at first, the way staff always are when someone new arrives with administrator in their title. I spent my first 2 weeks in classrooms, not in the office, and that shifted things. I know what I'm looking at when I watch a teacher work. I know where the effort is going and where it's being lost, and I know how to name the problem without making the person feel like the problem. By February, I was being stopped in the parking lot for real conversations, not complaint management ones. That difference matters more than it sounds. The students took a little longer. Children who come to a place like Bright Path have often been failed somewhere else first. They carry a particular kind of wariness, the kind that makes them watch you carefully before they offer anything. I understand that wariness from the inside. I'd been running a version of it myself for the past several months. Abby started calling me Grandpa Chester in February, at first only when talking to her mother, then to her friends, then to anyone within earshot. A few of the younger students at the centers picked it up. I didn't correct any of them. 6 weeks after I'd moved in, Amanda called. She'd heard through a cousin that I was staying somewhere outside the city and seemed to be doing all right. She said she was glad to hear it. Then she said Dylan's freelancing hadn't worked out the way they'd hoped, that 2 of his main clients had cut their contracts, that they were behind on the mortgage. She said she didn't want to ask, but she was going to ask anyway. She wanted to know if there was anyone in my new situation who might be interested in helping. Investors, maybe, or some kind of arrangement. She wasn't sure exactly. She just thought maybe I could put in a word. I held the phone against my ear and looked out the carriage house window at the frozen fields. "Amanda," I said, "do you remember what you told me on Christmas Eve?" A pause. "Dad." You said to figure it out. You said the room would be an office by New Year's and I should find something. I kept my voice level. I figured it out. That's exactly what I did, and now you're calling me to solve your situation. We're family, she said. We are, and I spent 7 months in your home trying to earn the right to be there. I fixed what was broken, I stayed out of the way, I contributed what I could, and when Dylan needed more space, you gave him mine. I watched a crow land on the fence post outside and sit there in the cold. I'm not angry at you, I just want you to hear yourself. Silence. So you're not going to help us, she said finally. I'm going to let you figure it out, I said, the same way you let me. She didn't have an answer for that. I heard later, through that same cousin, that they lost the house in the spring. Something in me felt the distant kind of sadness you feel hearing about a storm in a county you used to pass through. Not close, not sharp. Just a sad thing that happened to people I had once known well. I didn't call. That was almost 2 years ago. This morning I woke up to a light snow coming down over the property. The kind that doesn't quite stick but turns everything quiet. I made coffee in the carriage house kitchen, which I repainted sage green last fall, because Abby said the original beige was too discouraging. I've put in a small raised bed garden on the south side where the afternoon light reaches. In summer, Abby comes out and helps me water it. She's 13 now and has strong opinions about tomatoes that she's not shy about sharing. Maureen brought over a folder of teacher observations around 8 o'clock. We stood at the kitchen counter going through them, talking about one of our younger staff members who has remarkable instincts in the classroom, but loses her footing the moment a parent pushes back. It's a fixable thing. I know how to help her with it. I said so, and Maureen said, I know you do. That's why you're here. It's a small sentence, but I've learned to pay attention to small sentences. Last month, a father stopped me in the Bright Path parking lot. His son Leo, a 9-year-old who'd been labeled a struggling reader at 2 different schools, had finished his first chapter book on his own, and then explained the entire plot to his father at dinner without being asked. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to talk about it. The father shook my hand and couldn't quite get through his sentence. He didn't need to. I thought about what it means to matter. To have your presence be the reason something worked that hadn't worked before. I'd spent 38 years helping other people find that feeling. Somewhere in the last couple of years, I'd apparently found my way back to it myself. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept driving that night on Route 41. Maybe I would have figured something out eventually. Maybe I'd have ended up at that Holiday Inn after all, eating whatever the vending machine had on Christmas morning, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide what came next. I stopped because I saw a child's face pressed against the glass of a car window. That's the whole story down to its smallest true part. One moment of choosing not to look the other way. Sometimes the life you were supposed to be living isn't behind you. It's waiting on the shoulder of a road you weren't planning to take. You just have to be the kind of person who pulls over.